All right, we are ready to begin.
Got it.
Welcome to another Grand Canyon Historical Society virtual outing. Today's virtual outing is a recording of an outing that happened a month ago that was not recorded, and so we are playing catch up to record that event. Hey, are you a member of this organization? You know what? If you're not, you should be. It doesn't cost you a whole lot, $35 a year, 365 days a year. I think that's, gosh, is that 10 cents a day? It's not a lot. This is an all-volunteer organization, and please donate if you like what you see. As a member of the organization, you get the Old Pioneer magazine that comes out quarterly, and there is the most amazing Grand Canyon history in this quarterly that you'll ever find. Absolutely amazing stuff, rare, the obscure, the details that you never knew. www.grandcanyonhistory.org, the website for the Grand Canyon Historical Society, has a wealth of material. There's over 400 Grand Canyon oral histories in there. All kinds of virtual tours, virtual outings, miscellaneous Grand Canyon history. It's all there on grandcanyonhistory.org on the website. Again, membership's only $35 a year, and you can do that right online at grandcanyonhistory.org. Do you have a presentation you would like to give? Please contact us at outings@grandcanyonhistory.org and let us know what you've got. It'd be great to have you give a talk. Looking ahead, on Tuesday, August 8th, 2023, Carl Karlstrom and Laura Cundell are going to present Grand Canyon's spring and groundwater geoheritage. Today, Cindy Stafford presents Adventures with Nora. And I just want to introduce Cindy. Cindy Stafford lives in Page, Arizona, and she worked for the National Park Service for over a decade as a seasonal interpretive ranger at Grand Canyon National Recreation Area. She volunteers there still today in cultural resources. Her love of canyon country and its history began with a mini Grand Circle vacation in 1989 and led to hiking, camping, explorations, and living in Utah and Arizona with her hiking partner husband, Kern Nuttall. In a previous life, Cindy completed a master's degree in communicative disorders at the University of New Mexico, and she worked for 15 years in that field in New Mexico, Utah, Washington, and Arizona. Cindy is an amazing historian and has been to many archives across the country, just doing some amazing research on Grand Canyon and its regional area. Cindy, welcome to this virtual outing. I am now going to stop my share. Would you mind if we recorded your presentation?
No.
Great, thank you. Go ahead and do your screen share, and you're on your way.
All right, thank you. Share. All right, just one correction. It's Glen Canyon that I worked at, not Grand Canyon, but we're just upstream.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's an easy mistake to make, and I may make it myself tonight too, or today, I guess I should say. So I want to welcome you, and thanks very much for your introduction, Tom, and for recording this. I'd like to introduce you to the adventurous British artist Nora Cundell. Nearly 90 years ago, she fell in love with the landscape and the people of Marble Canyon, Arizona. And we're going to retrace some of her journeys using her own words. And I've also found some old photographs to illustrate some of the places she went, as well as some recent ones, as Kern and I tried to track down where these journeys took her in our backyard. And I tweaked the title of the presentation a little to say On Nora's Trail, because our explorations seem to become part of that story. And I included a lot of those photographs as well. So let's see if I can get rid of this. Oh, I don't know how to get rid of that one little thing. Whoops. Let me go back. Sorry. I was trying to get rid of that black thing at the bottom. You can't see that, can you? It's just my Zoom thing, I think.
That's
but
right.
Anyway, this is one of the paintings that Nora did of a portrait. She was a really good portrait artist. It's called The Smiling Woman, and it's at the Tate Museum in the United Kingdom. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, that's maybe a self-portrait. But I'm not sure it is, because it's just titled The Smiling Woman. So whatever. I first learned about Nora from Rousseau's book on Lee's Ferry, and he talked about this plaque. So, of course, Kern and I went to find the plaque, and it's easy to find. Have you been there, Tom?
No.
Okay, so you can see it from the road that turns to Lee's Ferry right off from the Marble Canyon Highway 89A. It's off to the left as you're going towards Lee's Ferry, about, I don't know, 30 yards or so off the highway. I think the highway back when this plaque was put in 1949 went right by this boulder. So it's not too far away, but you have to be looking for it to find it, because the plaque is kind of small, seen from the highway. And then, of course, this is the location underneath that prominent feature called 5 Mile Point, and across from Cathedral Rock in the distance. Then Nora gets several mentions in P.T. Riley's encyclopedic history of Lee's Ferry. And on the right, Carolyn Obagi Davis has a website called noracundell.com, along with some other artists. And I've used some of the information she has and some of the paintings that she displays on that. I understand that she's writing an article and maybe a book about Nora, and that she had access to some archival materials in England. So any of the gaps that I don't have, I think Carolyn will be able to fill in. Nora wrote a memoir called Unsentimental Journey. It was published in 1940, and she includes a lot of the experiences she had in the Marble Canyon area. And on the web, it said, this review, that this is a story of an irresponsible journey made by a staid English woman to the Wild West. It's quite expensive because it's been out of print. But I keep chafing at that word irresponsible, and I want to think they meant irrepressible or something, because I don't think she did anything that irresponsible. I think she was an adventurer for sure, though. It is available in the P.T. Riley collection at the Klein Library, and that's where I was able to access it. Nora's grandfather was a painter, artist, and photographer, and her father did some painting as well, although he worked as a stockbroker in the London area. She grew up in a suburb of London, Windsor, England, and she has just one younger sister, Violet, and she neither married nor had any children, but she was able to go to art school, which a lot of women of her era didn't. And she studied with Walter Richard Sickert, and he had apprenticed with some very noteworthy artists. He was at the Slade School where she studied. Her education in art was interrupted by World War I. He was transitioning from Impressionism to Modernism, and he had a style of painting he called urban realism. And when I saw this depiction in the P.T. Riley collection of Nora's portrait of this woman, who's probably a working woman in her kitchen, I thought, oh, maybe this is an example of that urban realism. They were encouraged to record actual life, not an idealized version of what was going on in the world. Nora was a friend of J.B. Priestley. He was quite well known, author, playwright, I think he was scouting for an actress when he came to the Southwest, and he and his family, his large brood of children, spent several winters in the Wickenburg area on a ranch and really loved the experience. And I think most people in Great Britain like to go where the sun was shining in the wintertime. This was during the Great Depression, and he published this book, Midnight on the Desert, in 1937. You may have seen this quote, "It's useless to try to describe Grand Canyon. Those who've not seen it won't believe it. And those who have know it can't be painted in pigments or in words." But it doesn't seem to stop people from really trying to do that. And so Priestley gave Nora some suggestions on where he thought she would like to go. And she was interested in seeing some landscapes that she would like to paint, as well as some people, and just having that experience of being in a warm climate. She and her sister and brother-in-law came to the Grand Canyon in the spring of 1934, and they were very disappointed to get to the rim and find an inversion and total cloud cover. But those of us who live in canyon country really love this kind of thing because it doesn't happen very often, and it's quite beautiful to us, and you can watch the clouds lift as the sun comes out. It looks like whipped cream in the canyon. But of course, they were disappointed. And so they continued on from the Grand Canyon, circled in blue on this map. They went on that new highway marked as 64 to the Cameron and Painted Desert area. That was also on someplace that Nora wanted to visit, and a lot of artists loved that area for painting. So when they stopped in Cameron, though, to get some gas, or maybe it was Gap, they said, "Oh, well, you're only a short distance from this great view that you can see at Navajo Bridge. It's Marble Canyon. It's the start of the Grand Canyon, same kind of geology, and you'll really like that." So they went on up there, and they knew that they could find accommodations there. The highway was gravel, and it looked something like this as they went down off the cliff to the Painted Desert. They got to the trading post on the east side of this new bridge at that time. It was called the Grand Canyon Bridge for many years. It finally got voted to be called the Navajo Bridge. The trading post, run by Buck Lowrey, was on the east side. It was owned by the Hubble brothers, and Lowrey worked for them, and he had worked at other places. He was from Tennessee and Texas and had come out to this area, learned Navajo. But in advance of the bridge being built, he was able to I should mention, this is what's called Cleopatra's Tomb. We know it as Cathedral Rock. And I noticed that the 5 Mile Point is kind of across and a little closer to us. So he put his his lodge, Marble Canyon Lodge, on the other side of the bridge. So it'd be on the west side. This is what the bridge looks like today, with the more modern bridge on the downstream side. So these buildings are in disrepair. They're on the south side of the highway. The current Marble Canyon Lodge is on the north side of the highway. It's been purchased and is being revamped, and maybe some new buildings put in there, small lodges. The north side of the highway now is being redone and reopened up, and I think they kept a few rooms open while they were remodeling. But David Crockett was his main names, and he went by Buck. He was a bit of a character, kind of a John Wayne type. He was an assistant sheriff or deputy sheriff at the time, and quite a well-known and well-liked gentleman with his family. Nora had such a great time. Even though it was a short visit, she decided she had to come back and stay longer. So in a year, she sailed across the ocean. She landed in New York, bought a used Model T, so it was 7 years old, and she set out on these highways to get to the west. She went towards Salt Lake City and then south to northern Arizona. And a lot of her book talks about this trip. This is a modern version. Her car would not have been this nice looking, but she said she named her car Araminta. She made more noise than a traveling tinker's outfit. But for anyone wanting a car that would unprotestingly scale mountains, traverse the trackless wastes, and even jump ditches, her price was beyond rubies. And Arizona Highways at the time was really not a pictorial great mag that we know it today. It was largely just talking about roads and what the condition of the roads were. So in the lower right of this, you can see from the Utah state line to where Nora was going, most of the roads were rated B, which in the upper left tells us that they were gravel, good condition. And there was one segment about 9.5 miles that was rated E, and that was considered graded, but just one step up from unimproved. So not quite the paved roads that we have today. She also could have known, if she had looked, that the information from Fredonia to House Rock was listed as gravel, partly under surface construction and loose gravel. When she would climb up the Kaibab Plateau to the Jacob Lake area, she would have seen signs, something like this: North Rim to the right and Cameron to the left. And she would have taken that left turn and descended on those switchbacks off the Kaibab Plateau towards House Rock Valley. And even today, that road is a little sketchy and scary, though it's paved. You have to pay attention to what you're doing. The weather conditions can change rapidly. As she continued on the road, she said on the 30 miles of desert between the mountain and Marble Canyon, there were many soft shoulders. They weren't marked, and it was dusky. It has the same reddish color as the sand, and she didn't know if she was really driving on the road or quite off it. So a little bit scary, but she did manage to get there right at sunset. And she said the Lowreys, they were her hosts, and she stayed and took her meals with them, and she became really a part of the family. She even volunteered over at the trading post and rode horses and did all sorts of things we're going to talk about. But she has quite a good sense of humor, and she said they are the most unplanned telling family that I know. And I think this is a woman who grew up in a city, and here she is in the West where things are working very differently. She said that the lunch could be anywhere from 12 to 4 and supper 6 to 8. And most of the family would be there. Virginia was usually at school. You never knew how many tourists would be there for meals, and that the preacher, host Shine Smith, came and went for days, weeks, and months at a time without warning. We'll talk about him in a little bit. And she said the Lowreys had rescued her many times from one predicament or another. They'd all had their turns in pushing, pulling, or digging Araminta out of the sand and rocks. So not quite as glowing of a description of the car here in this terrain. But she included both Lowreys, the preacher who had come to rescue her, Hopkins the cook, and David, especially David, who was I think about 23 years old, the oldest son. And she said, however much he may have cursed me in his heart, never by word or look did he show anything but the most perfect good temper over it. One of her early adventures was with David on horseback, and she had taken some horseback lessons in England. I think I read that maybe 7 lessons, so she knew how to get on and off from a horse. But when he asked her, would you want to ride with me over onto the east side and run an errand on horseback? She goes, sure. She got on the horse, and the horse was very docile and walking very steadily and nicely until his hoofs hit the surface of the bridge, whatever it was at that time. And she said then he took off like a rocket. And she was terrified because the horse, she's sitting up quite high, and she can see over the sides of the bridge, and the horse is just tearing across the bridge. They get to the east side and everything's fine, but the horse just slows back down again. So she was terrified. And another time she followed the Lowreys. They had to run errands in Flagstaff. They were going to spend the night there. So she had read that Montezuma Castle was only 35 miles from Flagstaff. So she was going to continue on, go see the castle, and then meet them in Flagstaff that night. So the first sign that she noticed seeing past Flagstaff after she had driven for quite a while said that Flagstaff was 46 miles behind her, and that Montezuma Castle was still another 16 miles. So it was taking quite a bit longer than she thought. And she did the tour, and then she asked the ranger, is there a different way to get back to Sedona and Flagstaff? And he goes, are you used to the western roads? And she said, well, anything's got to be better than that. And he said, well, then take the first right. And she got into this terrible, terrible situation. Um, I don't know if she had taken on this map Highway 79, I presume, because it was listed as the more majorly road, and that would have been down Oak Creek Canyon, down to Cottonwood, and then across to Montezuma Castle. And whether this is the first right that she took that brought her back to Sedona on the more secondary road, I'm not sure. But at any rate, she wrote that there were large 10-inch ruts that made the car lurch wildly, loose rocks, fallen trees, no road at all, a washed out bed of what had been a flooded stream. So she had a pair of boots in the car, and throughout her book, she writes or she draws these sketches and lithographs, whatever. And she goes to a stranger's house where there's a light, and she asks him to use his telephone. She calls the Lowrey. She goes, please don't call out the sheriff. She was already worried that they had contacted authorities because she was running so late. And she goes, I'm going to be coming. I'm still there. I'm going to find the way to get back. This guy's going to help me. So he showed her a way to get across this meadow and then get onto the road that she needed to be on. And he told her, the road you came by isn't even open till summer. So she was able to get back to Flagstaff, but had quite an adventure. I don't have very many pictures of Nora, but here's one, even though it's very faded and sketchy, scratchy. She's with Peaches Beard, who was the cook at the lodge for a while, and with David Lowrey Jr., and she's in her jaunty jodhpurs, and she's dressed coming back from a hunting trip with the boys, and notice that she's got her arms through both of theirs. I think she's having the time of her life. Now, a little bit about Hugh Dixon Shine Smith. He was called the Cowboy Preacher, and maybe some other beloved names. He was born in the late 1800s in Georgia, and large family. In his teens, he developed some issue with his eyes that was going to lead to blindness. He learned how to read Braille, but then the blindness did not materialize. He did develop tuberculosis, though. So it was decided he wanted to go into the ministry. He became a Presbyterian minister. He went to seminary in Austin, Texas, because that would be better for this tuberculosis. And apparently it resolved because he lived a long, long life. He's mentioned a lot in Riley and other books, not always glowingly by P.T. Riley, who seems a bit of a curmudgeon, but everything I could find about him, people were very taken with him. He was very friendly, jovial. He learned to speak fluent Navajo. He would fill in at trading posts when they needed help at the trading posts, but they did give him room and board at all the trading posts. And he had a place he lived. For 18 years on the reservation, he rode horseback, but then he did get a car. I think he spent 6 years in Texas as a circuit rider preacher to the Cowboys. And then he was sent to Ganado, and I think he was in Kayenta, and eventually the Western Navajo Nation. He parted ways with the Presbyterian Church amiably, as I understand. Now, sometimes you can read that he was defrocked, but he wanted to go out on his own, freelance, he called himself, because he believed that the Navajos did not lack for spirituality. They did not need Christianity forced upon them, but what they needed were material goods, food, clothing, and shelter. And he was given the name Shine by the Navajo. I've read two stories. One is that he was always smiling, and that's certainly how he's depicted in pictures, and that they loved him, that he had taught them a song. And I imagine that was this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This glowing description of him, it's by Gladwell Richardson in Arizona Highways. He's certain to be where storm clouds gather, where there's need of his kindness and strength in the depths of human misery. And during winter illnesses, he'll be there like the sun shining on the earth. He was in the Navajo Nation area during that pandemic of 1918, and he was critical in bringing medicines and supplies from Hogan to Hogan. And many years later, this is 1952 in the Denver Post, he was getting front page attention for his Christmas parties, which were quite well known on the reservation. He would have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 in different locations with blankets and toys and goods and foods that he had collected throughout the year from his benefactors. On this lower left article, it says that he was driving a station wagon purchased for him by the bartenders of Flagstaff, and that was in the 50s. I love that story. But some of his patrons were Senator Barry Goldwater and his friends, and Georgie White, and both of these two people played Santa in some of those parties. And then the Gouldings from Monument Valley Trading Post. In this photograph, Barry Goldwater is depicted as the Santa in 1950, and the donkeys are wearing antlers made out of branches. And you can see Shine is having a ball with it. He worked with the Navajo for 49 years and later lived, I think, with assistance in Winslow maybe. And it said, just bury me in a pine box. But he's buried in Tuba City, and his friends insisted on building him this lovely monument.
Oh.
Nora hired models, and that worked. She expressed some frustration because there were some cultural differences. The Navajo who are living their life and working and doing what they do with their sheep weren't used to coming and sitting for a model. So sometimes they would arrive late, they would pick up and leave early, and her painting wouldn't necessarily be done, but she has some remarkable paintings of the people. These are 2 that she included in her book. I suppose they were done in color. I don't really know. You can see the Vermilion Cliffs in the background of the one on the right. I think one of the more adventurous trips she took was a 2-week-long pack trip by horse from Lee's Ferry to some tributaries way upstream in Glen Canyon. And Ed Fisher was her guide, and David Lowrey. So just the 3 of them. And Ed worked as a guide for hunters on the North Rim area, Kaibab, for the deer hunt. So they had to wait till after the deer hunt to start their trip. So it was late November. And Ed and David took some supplies and food, feed for the animals. They packed 600 pounds of feed, and they packed it up, some of it up the Spencer Trail the day before they started, so that then when they went up the Dominguez Trail the day of their start, they wouldn't have, it's such a steep trail. It would provide some supplies up there. But they took along Shush the dog and 5 horses and 2 mules. And along the way, they picked up a Mustang colt that Nora named Windsor for her home. Thanks to Kern for drawing in the presumed route. And this is the map that's going to be displayed once again at the Powell Museum. They're opening up on Labor Day weekend after several years closure. They were flooded and they had to redo the entire building. So if you haven't seen this map that was hand carved, even though the reservoir is in here so we can't see quite the canyons, you can imagine that that's the deepest part of the canyons. So our group of 3 with their horses started up the Paria River, and they go up about 3 miles. The Paria Plateau is on the left, and the Echo monocline is on the right side. That's what they're going to have to climb, and then double back up through the Echo monocline and then continue. And the direction they're going is north. So the north is on the right side of this map. Nora, throughout her book, draws these great sketches of herself, line drawings, in a kind of self-deprecating manner and jaunty. You can see that where the arrow is, that's where the low part of the pass, Dominguez Pass, or the historic Ute Trail is. And it's quite steep and unstable ground. As you get near the top, it gets quite steep and the rocks tend to roll, of course, whether you're walking or I imagine on a horse. She drew this and said, "My gaze firmly fixed anywhere but down." There are some corrals up there, and I don't know if they date to the 30s, but I presume because there was a lot of ranching culture. As you get further towards the north, you see a beautiful view of Navajo Mountain and Tower Butte just to its left flank. Boundary Butte is a little to the left of Tower Butte, and that's the Utah-Arizona state line runs through there. Nora painted a scene very similar to this view. She called it the Promised Land. You can see Tower Butte there. She called it a land of every possible and impossible color, and said it's small wonder the old Mormon pioneers really did think they'd come to the Promised Land. I kind of think that when you're trying to wrest agriculture out of this desert and haul water or whatever, that it might not be as, you might think you're having to put in quite a bit of work. It might not have been seen as so colorful to them. And going further to the north in the center is Castle Rock, and that's the area they're going to be going towards. But we think the first night they probably spent in an alcove or a cave she described in this location. Up close, it's more like this, and it's large, and there's a lot of area inside where you could have level ground. We think that might have been the place because it's very close to willow tanks where there's permanent water supply. And she said, wood and water are the two things in an arid, treeless country you dare not let yourself forget. At that time of year, they were having wood fires, and they were cooking, and Ed did the cooking with the Dutch oven, and they had canned goods. Just tarps. They didn't take any tents or anything like that. And then looking off towards the Caparowitz Plateau in the background, Romana Mesa is that formation there, and then Gunsight Butte to the right of it, if you can see that pokey little projection. Romana Mesa is where Alstrom Point is. If you've heard of that or seen those famous photographs, it's of that Gunsight Butte area. Looking back, all of this land, most of it is Glen Canyon National Recreation Area now, and this part is the Vermilion Cliffs. And over to the upper left is where the pass is, the low point that comes across. The second night, we think she describes that they were still on this side, and this location is another water source. It looks more like this in a historic photo. You can, maybe in the shadows of the upper right, barely make out Lone Rock, the feature there. And this is near Willow Tank. No, I'm sorry, it's Wildcat Tank. And we call this butte Wildcat Butte just because it's right next to Wildcat Tank. And different geology. We've gone from Navajo sandstone to Entrada sandstone, the white. As they continued across what she called Wawea in 2 words, we call it Waweep, they went to a spring, and it was near Castle Rock, which is circled on the map. And then they would have continued up the Warm Creek area and off to the north, and she described for many hours being able to see this feature in the background, and she called it, she said it didn't have a name, so she called it Believe It or Not Butte, because it was quite beautiful. I like to call it Nora's Butte. We're getting into different geology in this part of the country. It's younger. I think it's Morrison topped with that darker brown of Dakota. And then in the background, the Caparowitz, the Tropic Shale, and the Straight Cliffs, much younger Cretaceous if you're into geology. So from the Castle Rock area, they continued towards the west, up towards, that's Warm Creek, I think, Warm Creek drainage, and then around, skirting canyon country and at the base of those cliffs, and then around that feature called Point of the Mountain, turning up into the upper reaches of Last Chance Creek. She says, we wanted to get a Mustang colt to take back with us. And if you've read Zane Grey's book, he refers to the Caparowitz as Wild Horse Mesa. So this is a bit of her story about catching that Mustang colt she named Windsor. Nora brought up the rear while the men went looking for Mustangs. There was no sign of them, so Ed and David started up the mountain. She said the trail was unbelievable, that there were no humans that she could think of until now, and that they had to hold on to the animals' manes. There was a crumbling knife edge and sheer drops of hundreds of feet. They rode over cliffs and ravines, and the men rode up what she called a precipice. But Nora followed in the gully. She didn't want to get up on that. And she ended up on the brim, though, and she did not see their tracks. So she turned and rode up until she was on the edge of a steep bluff. It was an impassable barrier, and she was rimmed. Half a mile away, far below, Nora saw the Mustangs and then knew that the men must be down there also. So she rode to the edge of the cliff to try and find a way off, but the horse would not be forced. David came back towards where she was, and he signaled to her that there was a way down 200 yards further. Below the place she had tried to take Silver out of sight from above was an 8 to 10 foot drop. But David beamed that she was in no trouble, a liar, but a gentleman. He traded horses with her since hers was fresher and took off after the horses. And this is just a photo of a Mustang colt, but hers was black with a white star, and she called him Windsor. So Kern and I go looking for this spring that's in the upper reaches of Last Chance. And we're on this rim and we're trying to drop down. Nora described Ed taking the horses down one at a time because that was the only way that he could get them off the cliff. And she said that only someone who had known where this was would be able to find this spring. And so when we found this cairn and an old log in it, we were thinking, oh, maybe this is it. This means you can get down. And I didn't draw in my lines as well as Kern did, but this is how you can get down to those different levels. And you would be able to take an animal down there. And indeed, you do find water in there. She described it as gushing out from under the projecting rim, and seen from above, meaning the canyon, it looks as arid as all the neighbors, and that's definitely true, but it's quite lovely down in there. She would not have seen Columbine in bloom, but she did want to call it Columbine Spring because it didn't have a name. And Ed was from Colorado. He had been a rodeo cowboy. And she thought that because of the Columbine, that would be a great name. So we had to go back another time to see the Columbine in bloom. But it's just Columbine and maidenhair fern there. And horse's tail, of course. And we were really lucky this spring because we had such a great winter that there was even a super bloom on the tropic shale, which normally looks very barren and there's hardly anything that comes out. So the moisture brings out this carpet of wildflowers that we've never seen since we've lived here. Not to this degree anyway. And then from the upper reaches of Last Chance, they continue all the way down Last Chance to that feature in the lake that's Gregory Butte. And it's a really wide canyon. It has flowing water in it. Herbert Gregory was a geologist. He took these great photos, and it's at the Marriott Library Special Collections, University of Utah. This one shows the Kaparovitz Plateau on the left, and then how broad and wide Last Chance Creek is. And of course, Gregory was there in 1922 because that's the year of the Colorado River Compact, and everybody's talking dams and where are they going to go and how high is the water going to be. From Gregory Butte area, they turned and went up the Colorado River and then into Rock Creek Canyon. Nora, as many others have commented on how terrible the water was. And even after all night, it would not really settle out. So they were drinking a lot of gritty water. And on the left is the entrance to Rock Creek Canyon. It gives you an idea of how those benches, you could have taken horses along those. Nora painted this. She called it Near Rock Creek. And I think that Butte on the right, you can maybe see in the next historic photo we look at. Don't know how long they spent in Rock Creek. I think a couple nights maybe. And then turned around, and we don't know how far up they went either. We turned around and came back down towards Gregory Butte, and then continued around that long projection fin is called Gooseneck Point. And at the end of Gooseneck Point is a feature called Meskin Bar. A miner named Meskin was mining gold there. So here's a Gregory photo looking upstream. There's that butte, I think might have been the one she drew near Rock Creek. Oh, I should just mention too, he said that this was near Crossing of the Fathers, looking upstream. I took a sprang photo from Klein Library where she describes Nora riding the horse in a hair-raising slither down the smooth face of rock to get to Meskin Bar down there. They spent 3 nights, I think, at Meskin Bar. And the men went back upstream into Rock Creek where they poached a couple deer because they were running short of supplies. Looking downstream from Crossing of the Fathers area, you can see the horse train of Gregory's on the lower left, and these bench lands that would be quite accessible by horse. There's Gunsight Point on the upper right. Sprang photo again of Crossing of the Fathers area, and possible to reach the river from both sides of the canyon, which is not always possible in very many places, and Padre Butte on the left. It's in the middle of the lake, but this spring the lake or reservoir was as low as it had been ever since filling in the 1960s. So we were keen to get out there as much as we could and see as much of the landscape as we could. And I know you were out there a lot too, Tom. But that's Padre Butte and Tower Butte in the distance. I think the reservoir was 180 feet below full pool, and it came up about 65 feet. It's going down again, of course. And then the Cane Creek area, this is where the put-in and takeout was for the upper river during the construction of the dam. So in the late 50s, you couldn't go within 25 feet of or 25 miles rather of the dam. And you can see how pieces of this dirt road existed throughout this landscape, and it's sandy, but it's quite accessible apparently by car. And at that era, we're looking at by horse. Another Gregory photo of this area that's towards Gunsight Pass. Our group continued around that Gooseneck Point, following that cliff line towards the edge of those cliffs, and then up through Gunsight Pass, and then around Romana Mesa, that's the Sand Hills area, and then back to the Castle Rock area. So they kind of did a big loop through these canyons. A couple Gregory photos. Gregory on the right, sorry. On the left, it's a few decades later. Circled in red is either a guy or a horse or both in Gunsight Pass, that notch. And this is the pass that Dominguez and Escalante missed when they were in this area. And they ended up traversing around this area. But the Ute Trail, this is where the Ute Trail went. You can see the horses on the right. And then our group of 3 ended up back at that first camp. They had supplies that they had left there, and they had enough left that Nora and David wanted to stay an extra night to explore this part of the landscape. And I thought, I can't imagine that. After 2 weeks out, and they were rained on and hailed on, and eating and sleeping in these, I think they stayed in this miner's cabin once that had no roof. It had 4-foot walls. I mean, they really had not much shelter unless they could find an overhang. But she and David were keen on staying out another day to explore. Like, wow, you go. Nora said food will never taste as good as it did on that trip in spite of the cold, greasy plates and the Colorado River water. She was a little bit worried about riding that horse down that steep slope of the Dominguez Pass trail. And She said, though, that after the previous 2 weeks, she had gained so much experience that it was a piece of cake, basically, and that before the horse even stopped at the bottom, she was putting on lipstick and powdering her nose in advance of getting back to the lodge. I really doubt she took makeup with her, but maybe. We just heard Melissa Savigny say that the botanists took makeup with them on their trip. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then another character in the Lee's Ferry area that Nora had met is Leo Weaver. He was considered a bit of a Hollywood cowboy. He loved to dress in fancy Western clothes and took his guests to be outfitted when they were coming to stay at his ranch. He didn't like the term dude ranch. He wanted to call it guest ranch. He built this, what we now call the Weaver Ranch House. He called it the Paradise Canyon Ranch. I think the Park Service website says that it lacked electricity, running water, and paying guests or returning guests, something like that. But it was really hard to make a living during the Depression in hospitality. Only wealthy people, by and large, could afford to travel. And in these remote locations, they couldn't charge enough to really cover their expenses. And the Lowrys certainly had problems covering their expenses, as did Leo, and eventually he lost the place. But one of his customers was also a British woman who met Nora in this location. It's very funny. They were from England, from London area, and they meet in Marble Canyon and Lee's Ferry. But Rhoda Power and her sister were well-known historians, medieval historians. She wrote this book called Red Cap Runs Away to explain medieval history to kids. And she traveled extensively, Russia. She was a journalist too and broadcaster for the BBC. She ended up giving Leo quite a bit of money to try to keep his ranch going, and to no avail. But she and Nora would meet and ride horses, and then afterwards have tea and toast at whichever location they were closer to, either Marble Canyon or Paradise Canyon Ranch. Leo Weaver had worked for the Chamber of Commerce in Flagstaff or at some point in his life, and he ran or organized the Phoenix Rodeo in February of 1938. He was always going for big promotional things in the state. And Nora and David went to the Phoenix Rodeo in 1938. I think this photo is from a couple years later, but gives you the idea of the big parade and what a big event it was. Nora wasn't sure she was going to like the rodeo, wasn't really keen on watching it, but she had to admit that bucking broncs was one of the more exciting spectacles that she'd ever seen. By this point, the Lowrys knew that they were going to lose their lodge, that they hadn't made payments on it, and they encouraged David to take Nora up to the Priya Plateau, the Sandhills, to show her the views and the from up there, and they spent a night camping. They could look down on the Marble Canyon Lodge. It's a great view if you've been to that southern edge, and she talked about the archaeological features that she saw up there. And she said that Mr. Hemingway grew homesick for Africa before he left, and so did I for Marble Canyon. The whole place had taken such a hold of me that I was heartsick at the thought of leaving it. The people who came in to run Marble Canyon Lodge told Nora, "You can stay with us. You can still take room and board here." And she goes, "I can't stay without the Lowrys." I mean, she was just very attached to them. Wow. And she said these are all the things that she was going to miss. The sunsets, the wood fires, the crickets, and the bridge at night, and the sounds of the water, the owls, the night sky, the Navajo singing to himself in darkness, the desert sand and the flowers. She was going to miss the scattered stone, and she was even going to miss the gas station. And she chided herself by saying, "I thought I was going to be taking an unsentimental journey," and here she was just heartbroken. When she's following the Lowrys in their car, she said that she felt like the whole Vermilion Cliffs and all they stood for were crumbling and dissolving like a dream that's past. I know they must still be standing there. To me, it's though on that morning like a mirage, they faded forever over the desert sand. And that again, like J.B. Priestley, she said at the end of her book, it's no use trying to describe it. Those who haven't seen it wouldn't believe, and those who have would merely be irritated at how inadequate it is to describe. I don't know much about this era, but she was an ambulance driver. She worked as a casualty superintendent during World War II in London. It was a very dangerous occupation. And she painted this of a guy she worked with, Superintendent McGill. The CS is for casualty service. They both worked as superintendents and ambulance drivers. There were just, I can't imagine the bombs and the fires, and the Blitz was 57 days or something. And of course, London was bombed for a couple of years. The ARP on his left pocket stands for Air Raid Precaution. And then the right is the symbol for the St. John Ambulance Association. David Lowrey unfortunately died right at the end of the war. He was in the Navy and his body was never recovered, but there's a plaque for him next to his mother's grave in Stafford, Arizona. Nora was able to come back once more. In 1947, after the war, she wrote to the Lowreys and she said, I can only take a certain amount of money out of Britain, but because of the war. She said, I want to come and I can only pay $1 a day for room and board. So they contacted their friends, the Clores. He was worked for the U.S.G.S, measuring the river flows at Lee's Ferry. And she developed a good friendship with them. She came and stayed for several months. She stayed in one of Charlie Spencer's cookhouses, and I got all excited thinking, oh, it was the addition he put on to the Lee's Ferry fort. But now I don't think so. I think it was a building that's one of the Spencer buildings that was torn down. Christina and Nora had done lots of hikes. I think if you saw Kern's talk recently, he talked about this hike they did up through the cliffs. And they were great friends. And Christina wrote this article in True West many years later and said that Nora planned to return to us in the multicolored land she loved. But sadly, she developed cancer and had an operation and died very shortly after returning to Britain. She spent the last few months of her life with the J.B. Priestley family on the Isle of Wight, which is just outside of London. So her ashes were returned. Her sister and brother-in-law brought them back the following spring in 1949. Shine Smith is on the right doing the service. Buck Lowry's holding the ashes, and then his wife Florence is next to him. I'm not sure if Nora's sister is with the plaid. I don't know who those folks are in this photograph. Christina wrote that because of Nora's paintings, a lot of people who won't be able to come will be able to have known a little of the beauty of this place that Nora called her second home. Oh, and notice that this painting was given to David Lowrey. His sister donated it back. So if you haven't been to Nora's plaque, I hope that you will go, and now that you know more about her, even if you have been, that you will go back again and scope this out, and that when you walk across the bridge, that you'll remember some of her stories and adventures and how much she loved this landscape, and maybe she will have inspired you to form deeper connection with it as well. I will leave the last words for Nora. She says, desert folk tell you that once you get the sand in your shoes, you have to come back to it. And the longing is sometimes almost more than I can bear.
Wow.
And then I'm going to break there because I'm not sure how our time's going. But
Time is good. We're fine.
I have some outtakes of some things I didn't feel like fit perfectly into the program, but we can look at a few of those slides if you have time and interest or want to ask any questions.
Yes, please. I've got a list of questions I've been making, but go through your outtakes first.
Oh, okay. That Christmas trip, they got back from their horseback trip. There was a robbery at the trading post, which was not an infrequent occurrence. There had been a murder the year before. The sheriff Buck Lowrey had murdered there had been a murder, and then he was able to capture these guys. But this was a burglary on Christmas Day on the east side at the trading post, and David was notified, and Buck, and they captured the guys, and then Nora and David followed them in their car and it's snowy, and the robbers are in front driving to Flagstaff to turn themselves in to the sheriff down there.
Gee.
And they were told with no uncertain terms, if you try anything, we're going to put you in our car. We've got gun. And so she was riding, as like the assistant. And she just thought this was crazy West, the old West. And so then she finds herself Christmas night in this diner with David, and he's wearing his 6-shooters on his belt. And she's just like, can't believe this. And then this is very interesting. The Associated Civic Clubs, not the LDS Church, planned this big reunion meeting for the pioneers, or to honor the pioneers, in 1935. So during the Depression, it was planned after the October conference in Salt Lake. So people returning to from Utah to Arizona would stop off at Lee's Ferry and have this big 3-day celebration. And on the left, it says that the purpose will be to honor the memory of the pioneers who braved the dangerous crossing of the Colorado in their battle against the rugged frontier of early settlement days. And then on the right, that it was an untracked land to reach and colonize the then barren wastes of Arizona. And I'm like, wow, I guess they didn't think there were any native people here, huh?
No, they did.
And Nora got a kick out of it because they pinned this ribbon on her, "Howdy Neighbor, Ask Me." And she's like, I don't know anything about what's going on here. But all the locals were given these ribbons because you know more about this place, in theory, the facilities and stuff. But this is in Ruscho's book, the tents that they set up to house these people while they stopped off after the conference, that there was hymn singing, speeches, a tent full of poisonous snakes, a rifle range, and a dance floor. I think they were trying to check all the bases. And then just another thing about Shine Smith, that he was almost a scout for the Lasky Movie Company, and he would help gather a lot of tribes and natives for these Zane Grey films. And this one, they said there was 10,000 natives that they had outside of Kayenta for The Vanishing American. And then he traveled with them to Australia and New Zealand, 11, mostly Hopi and some Navajo, and they would perform dances before the showing of this movie in Australia and New Zealand. And on the right, it says that they were hoping, because it was such a success, that they would go ahead and tour this country, but I couldn't find any other notices that they had actually ever done that in the United States. He also took a group in 1941 by train back to Washington, D.C. to meet with FDR, who was sick at the time. So they met with Eleanor, and she mentioned them a few times in her columns and was able to get Truman later to designate a lot of money for hospitals and roads on the Navajo Nation. So he did quite a bit of traveling with and promoting the needs that the people had.
Oh, very cool.
And then Kern and I had a couple experiences in Rock Creek Canyon I'll end with. And this was when we first, no, not first, but in 2011, we had gone up to Grand Bench and hiked up there and looked over into Upper Rock Creek Canyon, where down below, in one of those little rocks that you can hardly see, is a small arch, and it's called Woolsey Arch. And on the upper right is Stan Jones, who did all the maps of the lake and a lot of the history. He's standing in that Woolsey Arch. And up on the rim, there's a plaque, and it's to the memory of Tillman Woolsey, and a Escalante rancher guy back in the day. And then by boat, we were taken in when we first moved to Page by some friends we had met who had a boat, and we ended up on a rock, which was not a happy day for them. But we did manage to get off and get back to the marina before they had to get repairs on their boat. But that was in Lower Rock Creek Canyon. And so those are just a couple of the experiences we had in Rock Creek Canyon or nearby.
Wow. That is very, very cool. Huh. Well, Cindy, I have a bunch of questions. There's a band playing outside because we're right next to the high school. And so if you hear rumblings of drums and things,
all right,
you'll know what's going on. So you mentioned that Nora had a younger sister. did her sister have any family? I mean, have you reached out to try to see if there's any nieces or nephews and that have any recollections of her?
You're going to have to ask Carolyn about that.
Okay, all right. Um, and
I
then
think there might be some nieces. I don't know how old they are now.
okay. Um, do you know how Nora met Priestley?
No, but I presume there was an arts crowd.
Okay, all right. That would have made sense. Um, and
They
the
ran in the same circles, I'm guessing.
yeah, that would during her art studies.
I don't know, and I'm not sure. You know, he definitely was involved in the arts, though the literary arts. I don't know in terms. He was married a few times. I don't know if any of his wives were have been artists or what. Maybe their families were friends. But again, Carolyn would probably know all of this because she has the British archives,
Hmm,
archival materials.
okay. Um, then the lodge, I got confused. The east and the west side of the bridge. Did did the Lowrys ever have any structures on the Navajo reservation side of the Navajo
Just the
Bridge?
trading post, and that was owned by the Hubbles. Actually, the Hubbles, you could say, owned everything because he had borrowed money from the Hubbles for the lodge.
Where was the trading post then? On the west
On the
side?
east side, on the
Oh,
east side,
on the
so
east
it's
side.
not
Sorry.
there. Yeah.
Um, and is there any sign of that structure at all, or
I
is it
don't know. I
huh?
don't know. And I'm not sure how far back. I mean, I think it was on the east side of the bridge, but you know, now
Okay.
there's, I think they call it Antelope Trails or something, the
Yes,
little shopping area.
that's right. Okay.
But see, the road, the highway went there. So it was somewhere near the highway. And maybe Riley or somebody even tells what side of the highway it was on.
Okay. Then they really went into the heart of Glen Canyon there. Did she write about Glen um, in any more depth and detail?
I think just describing the trip, but the Lowrys suggested that she be taken into the tributaries of Glen Canyon. So that's all I've read about that.
Okay, nice, very good. Um,
And
and
by the way, a thunderstorm is brewing here. So in
okay,
case we lose electricity.
if you disappear, I'll know what's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine after spending some years there in the American West, in the deep heart of the American West, what the London Blitz must have been like for her. Um, did she ever write about that sort of as a
Well,
compare and
again, I
contrast?
remember I said I don't know much about that part of her life.
Hmm,
So, not that I have found, but again, I think Carolyn has access to some archival materials from England. So maybe she can flesh out more of that.
okay, all right. Um, I knew nothing about Shine Smith except occasionally heard his name. It sounds like an amazing man. Um, do you know any details about what Riley's bone of contention was with Shine?
Yeah, yeah. He describes. I think he thought Shine Smith was a freeloader. And he describes an incident where he
Ah,
was supposed to come help at the Paradise Canyon Ranch while Leo was away in the winter. And instead of helping chop wood, that he stayed up reading his Bible and burning the wood, you know, and the women ended up waiting on him instead of him really helping them. And so
ah,
that was what Riley commented on. But I've never read anything that other than, you know, all this laudatory stuff about him. And certainly, I don't know that the traders resented him. It doesn't sound like Nora did. I think she and he did a few things together, and he helped her drive somewhere to meet her sister once in the
mm,
snowstorm. And, you know, he was always seems to be trying to help people, but maybe he wasn't helpful that time with the Weaver
ah.
women.
And she is a wonderful artist. Where have you found her paintings?
On Carolyn's website.
Oh, okay, all
And
right.
then, you know, the ones that I credited, like the Tate And you can see online, there's some for sale. So a
Huh.
couple, wherever I credited, they're in those museums in Britain. And I
Okay.
think they did a retrospective show of hers in Great Britain, and I don't remember what year that was.
Oh, wow. Huh. Very interesting. Um, and then you mentioned Christina Kohler,
Chlor.
Chlor. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I missed that. Who is she?
She's the U.S.G.S. hydrographer's wife. They
Ah,
lived at
okay.
Lee's Ferry, and they lived in a house that's no longer there. The U.S.G.S. house for
Was right, was
in
leveled.
their
Right.
era.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Well, it's an unfortunate picture there, that wonderful boat on that rock. I'm assuming you guys were on plane, didn't see the rock, and they parked that thing on there. Is that
Yeah, we felt guilty because we think it was because we were along. They weren't used to having other people in the boat. But,
so it was heavy?
at the end of August, the lake reservoir was falling considerably since when they had last been in that canyon. And there was an alcove off to the right, and we were distracted by looking over at some boats that were over there. And as he took his eyes off for 1 second to look over to the right at that alcove, and then we hit that rock.
My, oops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Well, I'm sure that weren't the only boat to find that, and um, hopefully it's buoyed and marked. I'm sure it is, but it's sometimes hard to read those
well, now
buoys.
we're so much lower than this now. I meant to
That's
look up
right.
in 2007
Oh
and
my
see what
gosh,
we
that's
were.
right.
So this would be way high and dry now.
That's right. Well, gosh, I wonder, do you think Carolyn's maybe doing a book on Nora?
Well, yeah, she's implied, and she was corresponding with Kern. In fact, Harvey Leak is the one that sent Carolyn's email our way when she was inquiring about the landscape and where Nora would have gone on her
Oh, wow.
trip.
Okay.
And so he kind of, and Carolyn subsequently prodded us to go look more. Initially, I wasn't going to include that much about that horseback trip, but I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. Lovely country. Gosh, interesting that they were able to work their way down to the Colorado River and travel along the river.
I guess
Um,
that Last Chance Creek, and maybe it's called Last Chance because that's your last chance to exit and enter, easily. I don't know, or last water source, or we tried to find why they named it that and weren't very successful.
wow. Okay. Well, thank you for a really wonderful presentation. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up, and we will see you all next month.
Sounds great. Thanks
Thanks
very
so
much.
much, Cindy.
All
Take
right. Bye
care.
bye.
Bye
Uh-huh.
bye.